Okay, thanks. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Marshalltown Rotary Club meeting of July 6th. Welcome to those of you who are here in person, as well as those who are participating by Zoom. It's great to have everyone here. John Fink has agreed to help lead the prayer and pledge. John is participating by Zoom, so if you'll please rise.
Thank you, President Greasy. My wife Sue and myself were blessed 3 times in the month of June with grandchildren. So we are self-isolating ourselves so that we can go meet our new grandchildren. We did meet Owen Samuel, who was in St. Louis in early June. And we're looking forward to meeting Alexis Grace and Ethan Ray in Providence, Rhode Island in early August. So please pray with me. Eternal Father, we have much to be thankful for, and we thank you ahead of time for our many blessings. Sometimes we take these for granted, especially those we aren't even aware of. You give us many opportunities to help those who are in need. May we create a holy moment in someone else's life by simply passing our blessings forward. Intercede for us with your Son, the divine physician, for those who have fallen ill, for those who are vulnerable, and for those who have died. Intercede also for those charged with protecting the health and safety of others, and for those who are tending to the sick and seeking a cure. Heal our nation that respects all individuals, as we are all your children, and may we mirror the love you have for us with everyone who crosses our path. In your name we pray, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I don't believe we have any guests today. Am I mistaken? Okay, very good. In the way of announcements, I just wanted to say, if you participated last week by Zoom, you know that we started out looking ahead to the year 2020 in Rotary with these beautiful glasses. And if you missed getting one, I just happen to have some here because we want everybody to be able to see clearly the great vision that we have here for Rotary in Marshalltown. So stop up and see me. We have them in a variety of colors. And besides that, if you get invited to any graduation parties, they'll probably admit you based on these glasses. Also, I just wanted to remind those of you who are participating by Zoom that if you would like to share or ask questions at any point during the meeting, please use the chat capability on Zoom, and Kim will make sure that your voice is heard. We would like to reinstitute Happy News, and so it's time for Happy News. Do we have Happy News in our group today? Okay.
I just want to thank Larry Raymond and all of his crew for all of the beautiful masks that they did. I actually have 2. My husband has 2, so we're good to go for a little while, and I just think they deserve lots and lots of credit for what they did.
Okay, Kim has asked if you have Happy News, if you would come up in front so that everybody can hear. That'd be great. Carrie?
I'm excited to say that at the Grimes Farm, we have installed wayfinding signs for lots of trails. There are some little short ones and some much longer ones, some kind of out in the brush ones and some pretty clear ones. And if they were donated by the Iowa Valley Leadership Class of 2018. And so if you would love a tour, I'm happy to give trail tours anytime you like, but stop out and see them.
Thank you. Any more Happy News? So 2 great ones. Todd Steinkamp is here for the news of the day.
Thank you.
Kim said my hi to her earlier did not sound enthusiastic. So. Hey, it's good to see you. All right. The Marshalltown City Business District has created a COVID-19 restaurant relief grant, which is available for downtown Marshalltown restaurants. Grant applications are open from June 19th to August 14th or until the funding is exhausted. The establishment must have been open as a restaurant prior to March 17th. Downtown restaurants are encouraged to apply or receive additional information by contacting the Marshalltown Central Business District. We know now which businesses received over $500 billion in the Paycheck Protection Program loans from the federal government. The list includes 650,000 mostly small businesses and nonprofits. More than 58,000 Iowa businesses are part of the Paycheck Protection Program. In all, Iowa businesses received nearly $5.1 billion. There is no Iowa State Fair this year, but there is an event planned for what would have been the first weekend for the fair. The Iowa Craft Beer Tent is planning an event called the Butter Cow Festival. That's going to be August 14th and 15th at Waterworks Park. Organizers say they'll have local breweries and some state fair food vendors with local bands, spaced accordingly, according to social distance guidelines. Organizers say they'll have more information on the festival soon. There were 6 days suitable for field work last week, according to the Iowa Agriculture Secretary Mike Naig's weekly report. Corn is rated 85% good to excellent, and soybeans 84% good to excellent. 44 cases of COVID-19 have been identified at the Fort Dodge Correctional Facility. The cases include 39 inmates and 5 staff members. And with less than a week to go before the start of regional softball play, unfortunately, North Tama and Des Moines East have each been forced to cancel the rest of their seasons due to players testing positive for COVID-19. Tom, here we go. You decide. An employee is getting to know her new coworkers when the topic of her last job comes up. One coworker asks why she left that job. It was something my boss said, the woman replied. Why? What did he say? The coworker asked. You're fired. Yes? No? Someone? All right.
That's certainly a yes. Thank you very much. Betty Bowler is going to be introducing our speaker today. So as she comes up, I just want to remind her how proud we are of her and remind the rest of us that Betty is serving as the vice chair of the Department of Education Board of Education this year. And so that's a pretty impressive job, and we're really proud of you and know you're doing a good job of representing us. So thank you, Betty. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Mary. That was a surprise. Welcome, Rotarians, and welcome Rotarians out in Zoom land. I guess this is where I look for Zoom land, right? This is my first meeting back, and it is nice to be here, but I may be Zooming again when I'm not introducing speakers. So I am on the state board, and this is the first time I've met our new director personally. We've met on Zoom since March, but I actually got to see her face to face today. So Dr. Ann Lebo was appointed as director of the Iowa Department of Education in March. Now you might know that March was kind of an important month, so she walks into a new job, and I'm sure she'll tell you about that. She previously served as executive director of the Iowa Board of Educational Examiners and as Iowa's chief talent officer for the Council of Chief State School Officers, which I'm curious to know what that is, so hopefully you'll explain that. She's been a teacher, she's been a coach, she's been a high school principal. She worked in the private sector for a bit. She has 5 degrees, 2 doctorates. So we're in good hands with education in the state of Iowa. Dr. Lebo.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Just to clarify, one is a specialist and one's a doctorate, but I don't want to take too much credit, but this has been a great opportunity to come out and speak, since my first day on the job, which was actually March 13th, which was a Friday the 13th, which maybe should have been my first clue. it's been a significant transition in the work that we do. And so what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about today, I'll give you kind of a little bit more of my background, what we've done at the department, show you some of the resources that are available, and just answer some questions, because I know there are a lot of questions. The thing about education that we've really found is it affects everybody. And I think through this whole process, we've seen the impact of the essential services that schools provide on communities, on families, on businesses. And actually right now there's a call going on at the national level. President Trump has a call with Secretary DeVos and whole different groups of panels talking about the reopening of schools and what that means. So I think there'll be some additional information going forward. But the idea is to really help people understand what that means, where we've come from, the impact of that, and how we'll have to think about things a little bit differently. So as a side note, I'm originally from Grundy Center, which is just nearby. I love Taylor's Maidrites and Zeno's Pizza. We used to have a Zeno's Pizza in Grundy. I played 6-on-6 basketball in Grundy Center, so the Roundhouse was a great place to come down to. All of our tournaments were there. So I have a lot of fond memories of Marshalltown. And it's always been close since it's near my hometown. I've lived in Grundy Center for the past maybe 15 years. I graduated from there in 1990, went to Iowa State University first, and earned my other degrees after going back in education. I traveled out of state for business jobs, had a lot of great experiences. I think I always thought maybe my place was in education, but it was good to see the world from another side. And I think that's been helpful in my job now, because I think it's a better understanding of how they mix, how they intertwine, and how we can work better together going forward, particularly now. So I was in Grundy Center as a teacher and administrator for, more than 10 years. I guess I've sort of lost track of time, but for the past 4 years, then I served as the executive director of the Board of Educational Examiners. So that is the agency that oversees licensure and conduct in the state of Iowa. So oftentimes you might have seen things in the news about the work that we do, but every educator has to be licensed, and that was through us. And then the Chief Counsel of State School Officers is what actually it's my job, and a lot of other states are referred to as chiefs. And so it's the organization for that group. And then I was the Chief Talent Officer that was identified in my role to serve in that role. So that job focused more on educators and the content piece. So it was nice to be part of that collaboration now. And now I'm going to be in that role more as a director. Am I not close enough? I'm sorry. So then going back to day one, this was an incredible opportunity, and I'm very honored to be able to serve in this role, but it's definitely a different role than I thought it was going to be. So day one, my first day on the job, we were all out at the State Emergency Operations Center, which was activated by the governor, and then all the directors were brought out there. Eventually, we were sort of identified based on priority and who was most impacted by the work. But I spent about the first 3 weeks out there. And on the first day, had to issue some guidance to the field because we were being impacted by COVID, and we hadn't issued anything to that point. I was told that it used to take us 6 to 8 weeks to issue one piece of guidance, and we were issuing 6 to 8 pieces of guidance in a week because schools needed a lot of help. Day 3 of my job, which was Sunday, is the first time we shut down schools. So that was my transition. So we've sort of been rapidly adapting to needs and trying to make sure we're giving schools everything that we can to support them in this process, because there's a lot of unknowns and there's no blueprint for this. And we're trying to make sure that we're providing whatever resources and support we can at the state level to help districts make the best decisions for their communities and their learners. So some of what I wanted to show you, kind of start from day one and see where we started. So keep in mind, prior to March 13th, this page did not exist. And if Kim, would you like to just do a quick scroll of all the things that are on there? Just scroll down. So nothing before March 13th. There's more. That's the guidance that we've had to issue to the field in my time since I've been in this role. That doesn't include the entire Google site. That's a whole separate page of resources for schools on return to learn. I'm going to talk to you about what that means. So you can see how there's been a lot of work that needs to be done for schools, and that can feel overwhelming, but you think about it, started with one piece and we gradually built up, and there was lots of things that had to be addressed. As hard as it was, we're learning that shutting down schools was less complicated than trying to reopen things. And that could not be more true. And so this kind of mirrors sort of what that process looked like. And now we're sort of shifting forward. So I want to talk a little bit about the different types of guidances where we are now. And I'm happy to answer any questions about any of this, but we kind of broke it down by category, what it looked like. Right now we're in the point where we have two separate pieces of work that schools are focused on and that we're helping to support them in. One is return to learn, and then one is the reopening guidance that we label separately for an intentional reason. So if you want to kind of go down towards the bottom, there's a heading that should say return to learn at the top. And actually, one of the things she just scrolled over that I want to mention is there's a whole resource section for families too. I mean, we can't overlook that process when you think about the impact this had on our families when the school shuts down. So we had a whole section just for that on here also that you're welcome to look at. So return to learn is the plans that schools have to look at as they start considering coming back in the fall. Now, when we very first issued this, we first talked about it in April, and this was after we had just shut down. But you had to start thinking about what it's going to look like. The problem is there's two separate decision points. There's the return to learning and education and getting kids back into school and making up the gap of the loss of the learning and those different needs that weren't being met. And then there's the other sort of public health decision point. What we know in April, in May, in June is all very different when you're making the decision for something that's going to happen in August. So we purposefully labeled our guidance as return to learn and reopening guidance. Reopening was more specific to the moment in time, the public health conditions, what we knew, what were sort of the mandates and expectations. Similar to one of the governor's proclamations would be if you're shutting something down or opening up, here's a high level statement. These are the sort of the thou shalt and the thou shalt nots. And then you figure out the details underneath. We kept those separate because we knew this could change, but we knew even in April and May, there was a lot of things to start thinking about and planning for in the fall, and that was return to learn. So those two terms they support one another, but they're different. Other states did it differently. Some issued it all together, and what they're already finding they have to do is they have to redo the whole plan because the whole plan was tied together in the two parts. The challenge with that, though, is when you issue the reopening guidance, sometimes it's perceived as just being that's all we've done and not all this other stuff that's connected. So that's kind of what we're working through right now. So return to learn, if you want to, why don't you just click on the first one? The first one is the Google site. So we've partnered with our consultants, with the AEAs, and created a whole different site of sort of deliverables and resources that they can use to make a lot of different decisions. And I think one of these, once you, oh, here, right, go up, yep. So all of these categories of leadership, infrastructure, health and safety, Iowa academic standards, social and emotional behavioral health, is that the special education? Data, preschool programs and services. Okay, we broke those down into different categories. And so really, you know, the health and safety is, we're talking about the full health and safety of our children, but then we also have to connect that with that reopening guidance. And that's where they sort of cross. But all of these things have to be considered. I mean, we have to really rethink what learning looks like. And I think we've all felt the impact of it. And even in terms of how we connect and how we learn, you know, technology is a big piece of this. And in the spring, schools had to go with a continuous learning plan that was either required or voluntary. And in the fall, the only option is required. There isn't an option for voluntary anymore because we know that that wasn't as effective. But we also knew that schools, it was a big lift for some schools, and we didn't want children to be unintentionally punished as a result. So we didn't want consequences to affect them or their families because this wasn't a snow day, this wasn't summer break, this was a disaster, and families were trying to work through that. It was impacting them in very different ways. So we had to be mindful of that. Going forward now, we have some more time. In the spring, we learned how to get better at it. Schools learned how to connect better, but internet's a big piece of that. So whether or not families have connectivity or not, can afford connectivity or not, those are sort of different problems with different solutions. So as a state, what we're trying to offer statewide is a solution for some of those problems. You may or may not, if any of you have children in school, you might have received a household technologies survey from your district. The purpose of that was to identify areas in the state of greatest priority that we would use some of the governor's GEAR funds, which is part of those CARES recovery funds, to provide some solutions. Depending on what the survey tells us, we're going to offer different solutions. So if we find a part of the state where there might be families that can't afford it, can we provide some financial support to pay for that? Do we need to provide some hotspots as short-term solutions for the fall, with the understanding that there's long-term solutions where if there's literally no connectivity in that area, what's a different solution, whether it's some type of tower, fiber obviously isn't a quick solution. Our goal is to make sure we don't put anybody in a position to fail come August, particularly since we're saying that this is required. The value of some of this experience is that it exacerbated our inequities, but it brought to light the things that were probably underlying for a long time that needed to be addressed that we can no longer ignore anymore. And I think there's a common priority in making sure these things get resolved, and technology and interconnectivity is a big part of that. So that's one of the different sort of solutions. But on this page, if you ever want to look, you can click on this link. It takes you to another link. We have PowerPoints, we have course modules, we have resources, we have all kinds of details and descriptions for schools to think about. If I'm going to reopen in the fall, these are all the different types of considerations. Then we have some reopening guidance that's shorter. So our first one was for sports. We had reopening guidance for baseball and softball because we're the only state that has intergalactic summer baseball and softball. So we were the first to do this because we're the only one that does. And that was a big shift. So we had to look at what's that going to look like. We also had some summer learning, learning activities as part of that as well. And then our next reopening guidance was the reopening guidance for schools in the fall. And that was, again, like a 2-page high level. These are the mandates. And then within those mandates, the goal is to have as much flexibility at the local level to meet the needs of your learners, because it looks really different. It's going to look different in Marshalltown than it does in Grundy Center. It's going to look different than Davenport than it does in Denison. So there has to be some sort of high standards, high level standards, and then they have to figure out what that means. All schools have to have be prepared for 3 different options to return. One is the required continuous learning. That could be virtual, it could be online, it could be paper, it could be some way that you have to connect with your learners if they can't physically be in the building. I think we've shifted this idea of closing. It's going to look a little different because we won't close in the same way we did in the spring. You might have to leave the building, but you're going to have a way for kids to still connect. You're going to have a way to still feed them. You're going to have a way to still connect with the families. That was another huge lift this spring, and the way that schools provided meals for all of their students, not just those that they typically would. So they've learned how to fill that role, but that's a big shift and a big lift to sustain going forward. So they're preparing for those things as well. The other one would be they have a choice then, obviously in the building and what that's going to look like. And again, it might look different depending on the size of your school, what your resources are, what your facilities are like, and then maybe a hybrid model of both. We've heard examples of schools that might have, we're going to have a 4th grade class that one class is all in the building. One class is maybe split part-time and one class is going to be just online to try and meet some of those needs of their families. You might have high-risk students or staff. The other thing, if there is an identified case in your school, there's going to be some contact tracing, there's going to have to be some self-isolation. So there's going to have to wait to sort of, shift on and off from those platforms based on those needs. So we're going to have to be way more fluid than we ever were previously. And I think, schools have come up some really good ways to address that. But it's not going to be perfect, and we're going to have to keep getting better at it as we go forward. If you go back to, or maybe I should stop. Is this a little overwhelming? Do you want to just answer? How about I ask some questions? We just talk all day because you see what's on there. Maybe I'll just stop for a minute. And are there things you want to ask me or things you would like more clarification on? Anyone in the room or on Zoom? Yes.
You mentioned that there were certain things that were mandated for the Return to Learn program. Would you explain what are those things?
Yep. So if you want to go to if you go to when you're done there, sorry. If you go, I don't know if it's above or below this. I think it's above. It'll say PK-12 schools. Oh wait. Yep. Keep going. Stop. So the 6:30, there's reopening guidance, and then there's an FAQ. And I don't know if there's a way to pull up both. So typically, here's the other thing I forgot to say too. So we didn't just send all these documents out to schools and say, hey, figure this out. We actually had bi-weekly calls, which it first started as, let's have a webinar with superintendents. We're going to issue this guidance. We want to make sure they have an opportunity to ask us questions. And oftentimes you need to explain it. You can't just give them the document. We need to talk about it. So it first started with just superintendents, and immediately we maxed out our capacity and more people wanted to be involved. So we had to up our capacity to 3,000. And I think the biggest call we ever had was over 1,400 on one of these webinars. And we had them twice a week. We issued guidance every week and we had calls twice a week, which is a lot of work. It's a lot of work for our staff. There's a lot of prep in that. But we thought it was important so we could answer questions. Every question that was asked in the chat, which sometimes it was hundreds, we tracked, we kept a record of, and we made sure we addressed, or we addressed in an FAQ. Rather than saying this is how to do something, we give you decision points. Here's a question to think of, then you can think about what that means for you. So for the reopening guidance, we did two parts of that. We did the guidance, then we did the FAQ. Some of the high level things that people wanted to know is that basically the requirements of masks and the requirements of social distancing and what would that look like? Because I think if you talk about strict interpretations of social distancing for buses, for example, a 77 passenger bus could only hold 13 kids. So schools are asking, we're going to buy more buses in the fall. Well, it's not practical. It's not possible to buy more buses by the fall. It's not possible to build more schools or to add on classrooms. So the mandate is that, neither is here's the other thing too, with reopening guidance, remember this is public health guidance. This isn't just the department. This is the part where we collaborate with public health on what do they need to do. Return to learn is us. So for the reopening, it does not recommend requiring masks for all staff and students. But it doesn't say don't use masks, and it doesn't say encourage masks. One of the things we learned in our first reopening guidance is that we said encourage the use of masks in certain scenarios, but we listed out, and districts looked at that and thought, well, I'm going to be safer and I'm going to require it without thinking through what that meant and just saying, well, the state says we have to require it. But when you go from encourage to require, you create a whole different set of decision points and implications that have to be thought through. It doesn't mean don't do it, but it has to be thought through for what that means for you at the local level. Same thing, we talked about bleachers and we said limit, but we didn't say prohibit. Well, so some stadiums only have the bleachers take the whole space. So if you block out the bleachers, there's nowhere for people to sit. Well, some schools thought, well, I'll be safer, I'll block them all out. So they taped off the bleachers and now everybody's huddled up in chairs, around it. So it's counterproductive if you don't think it through. So this is not saying, and so some people just saw this and didn't see all the other stuff that talks about how you implement social distancing, how you implement the use of facial coverings for your learners, what this looks like. This is just saying it's not a mandate for everyone for different sort of public health reasons. And so it kind of goes through all those different things. So these are the high level, there's like 10 high level. And if you look, it's categorized by health and safety at the top. And then in the FAQ, and I think maybe in here, we tell people this is and to supplement your return to learn work. So if you go to return to learn under health and safety, there's whole modules on facial coverings and social distancing and hygiene and cleaning and rotating kids and mixing groups and adjusting sizes and how you might mix things. So they have to work together. So we kind of have the public health part, the educational part, and we got to figure out how they live together. And so there's a whole, we could probably talk all day just about that part, but that's kind of the connection. So those are some, and the reason why they needed to know that, I think right away, is because there's some cost implications, there's some staffing implications, there's some scheduling implications. But at the end of the day, all this does is allow districts to make their best decisions for them. That's what this does, and that's what we want. And we want to make sure we can support them. If it changes, and if public health says something different, or if public health conditions change, well, return to learn can still stay the same, but we would have to issue new reopening guidance because it's different. Moments in time change, conditions change, and that's kind of why they're separate that way. So that's sort of help. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn you by this mic. It says, my understanding participation? Is it likely that a virtual situation happens in any district? How likely is it that significant participation can happen?
Do I need to repeat that? Okay. So in the spring, it was voluntary. There was very few schools that made it required, and I think that's why you see that number. Going forward, it's just like normal school. Attendance is taken, and there's follow-up, so it isn't going to look the same. And again, the reason why it looked like this is because there were schools that were not prepared to go there, and life was being impacted in much different ways. So that was a real challenge. But even through, you know, there was one benefit where even if the students weren't engaging as much as we would have hoped, teachers were getting better at this, because that's a big lift for them too. Some teachers have never done this. You know, they're used to being in the classroom. They haven't taught online. They don't have the materials online. They don't know what that means. Are my kids sitting in front of the computer for 8 hours every day? I mean, there's a different concept to instruction and learning when you're in an online platform than it is if you're just sitting in the classroom. So it was a big shift for them, but it gave them a chance to figure out what that could look like, what that should look like, and what it needs to look like differently in the fall. Okay, yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit about whether there's been thought or coordination given to out-of-school care for children, whether it's teachers, children, or whether it's children that are young that require care when they're not in school?
So the question is care for children if they're not in school. So that actually was a big piece of the conversation early on. And we partnered right away with DHS, who oversees those programs, did some outreach to schools that were able to stand up some emergency childcare for some of those providers in light of these circumstances. Lots of schools, there's a survey that we have created that schools can send out that ask a bunch of different questions for the fall. One of them involves, you know, do you have childcare? You know, and so they can figure out if we go online, how many people are in a bad position and what can we do as a solution. Some schools have their own childcare right in it. Even when I was a principal in Grundy, we were partnered with our YMCA. So if we had to call off school for a snow day, it was a lot easier of a decision because we knew they would take any kid, even if they hadn't been signed up, and we would figure out how to pay for it later. But we had that resource available. So this forced that discussion to kind of rise to the top and make sure that's been provided. So that's part of our questioning in the fall. That's part of the partnerships that have been in place in the spring, and that will be part of the discussion going forward, where families say, you know, if we ever have to go offline again, even if my kid has to go offline because they were in a class or they were exposed or I was exposed as a staff member, what is your solution for that? And so that's part of what schools should be reaching out to make sure is being provided. It's a lot.
Just a follow-up then for kids that are in out-of-school care, and I work in the line, so
Yep. Yeah.
But will they be, has there been thought about how to support online learning when they're out of school in childcare?
Yep. So the question is, how do you support, you know, online learning while they're out of school in childcare? So I think that's where there's this kind of understanding of if you are learning, like if you've ever taken an online class, the idea is that there's sort of these things you have to do, but there's not a time when you have to do them. So it might be by Wednesday have these things done. It's not going to be you, the child care provider, are now the teacher. You know, it's not going to be you, the parent, are now the teacher. You can provide care to look over that child, but the learning is not defined by the time. It's defined by the activity. And that's where there's a huge shift if there's never been, I've actually taught and written online courses, so maybe I have a different understanding of this, but it's not tied to sitting in front of the computer for the hours of the day. It's about getting work done over a certain amount of days or a certain amount of time. And so then it's sort of like being self-paced learning that's done outside of the classroom. So I think what we don't want people to think is that, again, parents have to go back to being teachers. Now childcares have to go back to to be educators. And that's not our expectation. I don't think that's the reasonable expectation. I think as we get better at understanding what online learning or virtual learning or distance learning looks like, there's going to be a better understanding of what that expectation means. Yes. Oh, hi, Theron. I'm talking about you and you're in the room. I didn't see your face.
I'm really thankful about, as you said, I mean, there's ongoing discussions with the TE and RE are know that there'll be some families that put that in all virtual option. I was just on a conference call yesterday, and pretty clear logistically behind them all to pull off all from school and then from the employers in workplaces concerns. One thing that made me feel better about potential of getting everybody back, if we don't put it in the state of emergency, is that American Catholics came out with guidelines saying that if you do wear a mask and hospitalizational, which is probably preferable in most cases, and or can provide other barriers of protection, and all of a sudden that 6 foot of the CDC is more like 3 foot. And in school buildings of ours, our nature age, are not the ideal square footage per classroom. 3 foot is really doable. 6 foot is almost impossible. Of course, it's a hybrid type of situation. And there's loads of other things that will have to take place, like lunchroom, not having assemblies where kids are gathered. There's a lot of moving parts to it. But I really feel much more confident today that again, all kids and staff, some that are going to be. My greatest concern continues to be the technology strength. Mainly from a financial standpoint. On average, school districts, the average school expect to spend and bringing everybody back upwards of $1.8 million more than 81%. We've already burned through $800,000 stimulus just by technically through summer into the very beginning by extra devices. We were already 1-1, but we experienced some devices. Elementary age students, so we had to send them home in a hurry, protected covers, like microphones, so we spent $350,000 devices. My concern with the survey I shared with students, we started surveying our patrons back in April, knowing that first and foremost we would get quick access to seniors, 500 kids take credit classes, community college to get them through 150 hotspots spring, another 150, so we have 300 have a successful virtual summer school program. And then we have another probably 700 to 800 students for families we didn't have. We're able to connect with until we ultimately see what was going on. So we brokered a contract with Mediacom, our largest local provider, to determine eligibility on 450 households for which we're now paying the monthly $9.99 fee through the next full year in order to get their kids. So I'm just illustrating how we saw that happen. We spent $3,000 a week to do a postcard to help facilitate your survey on technology. That's the most possible and fairly near ones that we initially did. So I'm hopeful that when and after time comes about for that expenditure case, hopefully our previous work to be taken into account internet distribution of support, I guess. But it's, I am feeling very confident and hopefully get everybody back. One of my biggest concerns is transportation. The average age, and we're talking about, black people, but less drivers. Our average age on the bus driver is 6. So, half of them automatically can fall in that high risk category. We spend $10,000 on the study to try to see if we can stagger bus routes, existing buses, fewer drivers, different start lanes, anticipating that I'm not sure what happens if you don't have the capacity to drive everybody with a bus that qualifies to be transported. So that's another concern we have. But I am feeling much more confident, although my anxiety level is many less, that we're going to be able to pull it off for this reopening. And then again, thank you guys for all the support. Given, I think part of the challenge has been due to the lack of requirements that has to be brought to school districts to try to figure out how to navigate the waters in their local communities to circumstances regarding the number of cases, obviously, right now it's also quite some time. But I think all in all, we're in a much better place, like you said, but it absolutely isn't going to be perfect. And when we roll out here, don't like it, and hopefully we can, navigate that.
Thank you. And, I think you touch upon a few different things. One, even when you talk about local public health support, we have schools some schools are in 3 different counties. So they have 3 different county public health. It's who do they go to? So we're working with now the director of DHS is now also the interim director of public health. So we're working with her and the State Department of Public Health to get some consistent guidance for local county health and what that means. One of the things we learned, again, we're learning a lot through sports. We learned through summer sports is that when there was a positive case and how that played out was different depending on the county. So some schools said, well, my team had to do this, their team had to do that. That seems inconsistent. So we're trying to work through them to get some more consistent support for what it means. But you make a great point. It is going to look different because different counties are going to be impacted in different ways. And that's why you have to be able to make those decisions that are best for you in collaboration with your public health, in collaboration with your leadership, and with your legal counsel to consider all the different implications of what that means. And knowing that it could totally change. You're going to start one way and it might look totally different. We are trying to use some of the, like you talked about, the technology, the gear funds to do the connection. And then we have some ESSER funds we're trying to help pay for, provide something with a platform. That's to be announced yet, to mitigate some of that expense, because we know that is a huge cost for districts. It's a huge lift. Some had it and some had nothing. So, the emergency funds that schools received just didn't go very far. And we know that. So we are trying to leverage as much as we can to help provide some additional support. We won't be able to cover all of it, and that's kind of the reality of it, but we were trying to do whatever we can to make that support available. I had something else, but I don't remember. Oh. I don't know what time it is because my watch is ringing, so I can't see the time. I can't answer it. Oh.
Leave the watch.
I know,
Yeah.
leave the watch. So am I done? Okay, that was long.
Okay, well, please join me in thanking Dr. Lebo for these great questions. And I would like to tell you that one of the projects of Rotary International is to eradicate polio in the world, wild case polio. And one of our favorite sayings is we're this close, because I believe that we're down to 2 countries in the world, Afghanistan and Pakistan. But as a thank you to you for coming to speak to us, we will be making a donation to the Eradicating Polio effort in your honor.
Oh, thanks. Oh, yay. Thanks. With my 20/20 glasses that she
Yeah,
needs.
yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Got everything she needs. Thank you again. Next week, we're going to get to hear everything about the local COVID-19 situation. Pat Thompson from the Marshall County Public Health Department will be speaking about everything you ever wanted to know about COVID-19 in Marshall County. So get ready with your lists. I'm sorry? Oh, yes. Kim reminded me that she will be speaking to us remotely. She will not be present, so just be aware that that's the situation. So we're getting experience with all kinds of ways to do Rotary. So please join me in reciting the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? We are adjourned.